Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. The PA Senate agenda is our topic today. You can join our discussion by calling us at 1-877-PA65001, or you can text us at 717-219-4001. But first, we're joined by Angela Columbus from Spotlight, PA. Angela, you filed a story about a state agency spending public dollars on a private lobbyist. What's going on there?
So last month, I got a tip that the Pennsylvania Game Commission had hired a lobbyist. I knew nothing else about it. And as a result, I did a public records request from the Pennsylvania Game Commission and received back records that showed that the agency had contracted late last year with Allegheny Strategy Partners. That is a private lobbying firm run by Joe Scarnati, who is was the former Senate President pro tem, and was spending $10,000 a month on Scarnati's firm to help it lobby the state legislature.
Angela, why is the Game Commission's relationship with lawmakers important to them?
Well, they said that during last year's budget cycle, they had an issue. The legislature had wanted to transfer certain funds out of the Game Commission to put it towards a different fund for watershed protection. It was a hotly contested issue, both with hunters and with some environmental groups. Eventually, it didn't go through, but to them, that showcased the need to have better relationships with legislators.
What is the state government's policy, Angela, regarding the propriety of this relationship?
Right. So there is no policy. Having said that, it is pretty rare for a state agency to hire a private lobbyist because in theory, you're hiring somebody to lobby what amounts to your colleagues in state government. And so I did a search going back to 2007 to see how many state agencies had actually hired lobbyists. And the only one that I found was going back to 2007 under former Governor Ed Rendell. The Turnpike Commission had hired lobbyists. This was a time that the governor was looking to lease out the Turnpike to raise dollars for roads and bridges and potentially public transportation. And that was a very hotly contested issue. And the Turnpike Commission ended up hiring what was 5 lobbyists over a couple of years and spending nearly $1 million. But that aside, there really aren't any examples of state agencies doing this, primarily because it's come under criticism by good government advocates who say it's not a good use of public dollars.
Now, Angela, given the way the Game Commission operates, so where does the Game Commission get the money to pay these lobbyists anyway? Since its public dollars are involved, we're interested.
Right. So on its website, they say that the majority of their money comes from hunter and fur taker licenses, and that they don't receive money from the general fund. So after our story ran, I heard from many, many hunters who were pretty upset that their fees were being used to go toward private lobbyists.
Now, in your story, Angela, you went on to report that the Game Commission is they're paying for a lobbyist that may be duplicative because it seems like they already have someone on their staff who is paid to engage with lawmakers.
That's right. So they have a legislative liaison who's paid just over $105,000 a year to do that work, right? To reach out to lawmakers, to make sure that the issues of the agency are heard. When I asked the Game Commission about why they needed extra help, they just simply said that they were hoping to enhance those efforts with state legislators.
So tell us about the status of the latest arrangement then. In other words, when does the relationship between the Game Commission and this lobbying firm end?
Well, after the story ran, there was a Senate budget appropriations hearing during which several senators, including Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill, questioned the head of the state game commission about the propriety of the contract. And within days of that hearing, the commission sent a letter to her and several other senators saying that they would not be renewing the contract with Allegheny Strategy Partners when it expires in April. And they cited the concerns that the senators had over the propriety of using public funds for private lobbyists.
And last question, Angela. Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill, whom you mentioned, and she's going to be our guest here in just a few minutes. She has a plan to end this practice of state agencies hiring private lobbyists. So can your Game Commission story give a nudge to her plan that might put it in motion or give it more momentum?
I think it certainly gives it more momentum. There is an actual concrete example now that she and others can look at that this does happen. And so, you know, the issue of lobbying and tightening up lobbying disclosure has always been controversial, but we may actually see some movement this time on that bill.
Angela Columbus from Spotlight, PA, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
More PCN Capitol Preview after a short break. Welcome back. Our guests are Senator Judy Schwank, Democrat from Berks County, and Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill, Republican from York County. Senator Phillips-Hill, we'll start with you. You're in the majority. Which items on the legislative agenda are most important to your caucus?
Well, we are, as Senate Republicans, looking to create economic opportunity across our Commonwealth. We want families to be empowered. We think that there are so many opportunities with various pieces of legislation that we are actively working on. Many we've already sent over to the House to make those things happen.
What are some of the specific things you're working on?
We're looking at regulatory reform. You know, we just finished up 3 weeks of appropriations hearings, and I heard the DEP secretary say this is something that they are interested in working on. We need to fix our permitting system. You know, opportunity for families, opportunity for businesses, for workers, it all comes back to those businesses being able to get permitted, to be up and running. We hear so often that that's not what's happening here in the Commonwealth. Recently, I lost a business to North Carolina because they said to me, they can permit, build and open a hotel out of state before they can even get permits here in the Commonwealth to get a shovel in the ground. Recently, a colleague was talking to a company from Taiwan. They want to build a chip factory right here in Pennsylvania. And you know what they said? The biggest problem is your permitting process. This is a place where I think Republicans and Democrats can come together, where we can create that economic opportunity and see businesses create jobs that will help our families here in the Commonwealth. Looking at taxes, we have an opportunity to fix our taxing structure here in the Commonwealth. And actually, one of the quickest things that we could do to fix our tax situation and really to create assistance for our families that are feeling the brunt of failed economic policies coming out of Washington, D.C. that are driving inflation, driving high interest rates, is for the governor to stop his lawsuit and get this Commonwealth out of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That would be an energy tax decrease for every family across the Commonwealth. And of course, we are going to be looking at education. I recently co-chaired the Basic Education Funding Commission, and I think we have great opportunity to improve the education of children across the Commonwealth. We know it's so much more than just money. It's about accountability, it's about reforms, and it's about empowering parents. And those are just a few of the things that we're interested in pursuing.
And we'll try to explore all of those topics later on in more detail. But for now, Senator Schwank, what's important to your caucus?
Well, for the Senate Democratic Caucus, obviously, we're looking at the quality of life for our citizens throughout the Commonwealth. What is it that we need to do to ensure that people can And not only the people that are here now today, but our children and grandchildren will have the opportunities to succeed no matter what their life course is. So that means investing in the sort of the infrastructure of life is the way that I would say it. Things like housing, things like education, things like access to health care, opportunities to increase your wealth as an individual throughout your life stages, to ensure that our most vulnerable citizens are cared for, including our elderly, our children, starting with pre-K, even into child care. Doing the things that will enable people to live their best lives are really what we're all about. And so there are many aspects in the budget that we're very concerned about. We want to cut costs. We know that inflation is a huge issue for people. We want to, for example, through the property tax and rent rebate program, which the governor expanded last year, we get tons of compliments, people saying, this has helped me.
Is he proposing another expansion?
Well, it will, for this year, it will be a continuation of the program, and there will likely be more people coming into the program. But that extra funding, in terms of those checks, has made a huge difference for people, whether they own their home or whether they are renting. For elderly, for individuals that are very, very low income, this has made a big difference. Those are the kinds of programs we want to focus on and continue to help people access.
Senator Phillips-Hill, of the several priorities that you mentioned, let's home in on education funding, because certainly that's a huge part of our budget. Now, last year, a court ruled that Pennsylvania's funding of schools was unconstitutional. So when that message came out, how did that set the stage for what lawmakers should do?
Well, at the same time, the governor made the decision to reconstitute the Basic Education Funding Commission. Under the law, it is required to meet every 5 years. 2020 would have been the year it would have met, and of course we know that was COVID and a lot of things shifted. So it was reconstituted in 2023, delivered our report at the request of the governor and the budget secretary in January so that it could be ready to go for this budget cycle.
What were the conclusions of that report?
Well, there were actually two reports. There was a minority report and a majority report. And the key difference was that for the first time in the majority report, first time for any commission, they made a recommendation on a dollar amount for funding basic education. And in the minority report, which I supported, believe that the actual amount of money that goes into education is really the purview of the General Assembly in conjunction with the governor through the budget process. And so the governor made recommendations. Now, interestingly, put some of those recommendations from the majority report into his budget recommendation, but didn't put all of them into his budget. And so those are things that we're going to have to continue to work through. And remember,
what
that
are the
decision,
things he adopted, that the governor adopted?
The actual formula, interestingly, Democrats and Republicans agreed on the actual components of the formula itself, which is actually what the commission is supposed to do under the law. We recognize school districts need predictability and stability in their funding, and we put factors in there to help smooth some of those numbers so there aren't major cliffs for these school districts. They can ease their funding. We had disagreements, and those disagreements really were outside of that formula.
Senator Schwank, what was in the minorities report regarding education?
Well, obviously, we took it seriously. I was not on the funding commission as the senator was. However, we understood that something had to drastically change as a result of the Commonwealth Court case. And interestingly enough, Republicans did not challenge this. There was, we knew we had to, in some way, incorporate in that over 700-page report, or from the judge that we absolutely had to do something about education funding. And for us, one of the things that we understood was that there's such disparity among school districts in the Commonwealth. It is just not right that some students, because of the circumstances in the communities that they live in, they're wealthier, they have more industry, that they are spending way more per pupil on funding. And in some areas, particularly in our urban, and by the way, in rural areas too, we are not spending as much per student. Constitution talks about having a fair and, a thorough education. We can't do it the way that we had been doing it. So what the governor landed on was that $1.072 billion increase in basic education funding, $872 million for first year adequacy investment, and $200 million for the basic education funding formula. Also incorporated in that were charter school reform. Those are, parts of the things that were also put in the budget. Funding for special education, an increase in that across the Commonwealth. So, we feel that this is, again, part of that infrastructure. If we want Pennsylvanians to have the future that they deserve, if we want to see a growing economy, in Pennsylvania, we're going to have to invest in education. So that is what the governor has proposed, and we'll see where we go from here in terms of, what we end up in funding.
Larry, I understand that we have put historic amounts of funding into education, and those are not my words. Those are the words of former Governor Tom Wolf and Governor Josh Shapiro. And it's interesting to note, it's not just money that's going to make a difference in the educational outcomes of children across this Commonwealth. We've had colleagues speak on the Senate floor who've said, even after those historic investments of money into public education, that children in their districts still are at 0% proficiency in math and 0% proficiency in reading. That's not acceptable. So it's not just money, it's accountability. It's making sure that we get a return on that investment. It is criminal for us to spend that kind of money and children not be well educated or at least proficient in math and reading. It is criminal to taxpayers to take their money and not be able to produce students who are ready to take on the challenges of this Commonwealth. Additionally, we need to put that money into things that are actually proven to improve educational outcomes. And so throwing money at a problem isn't going to solve this. And the court decision said it wasn't just the amount of money, it was how that money was collected, how that money was distributed, and how that money was spent. So there's going to be much more to that conversation. And again, in the minority report, we talked about the need for property tax reform and relief. And it's interesting to note that what the governor has proposed is not dollar for dollar tax reduction for our beleaguered taxpayers. We're not even sure if it's going to just be a supplement to school districts that tax their local property tax owners a lot, or whether he envisions requiring that to be given back to those beleaguered taxpayers. Still a lot of questions.
Yes, there are a lot of questions, but I think, the idea that's a typical line to throw money at a problem, but it's years and years of disinvestment that have gotten us to where we are.
Disinvestment, meaning the money's going in the wrong place?
Exactly. Or, we like to say, well, we don't raise taxes. And in this budget, I want it to be clear we don't raise taxes. But what we have done is, in terms of education funding, we have thrown the burden onto our school boards to increase taxes, to help fund education, even simply just to cover the costs that go on, that continue to go up. It is true. Just money alone won't make this happen. We have not been investing in teachers. We have not been investing adequately in pre-K and early intervention and the kinds of readiness programs that get our children ready for school. We've had a long debate in this Commonwealth about what testing actually means in terms of student proficiency. And we certainly do have issues. But teachers will tell you, and they've certainly told me, Senator, not only when we test, we're testing everybody in the school. So when we're looking at the test scores and you're looking at a school and saying they're not performing well, you need to understand that it is an accumulation of a lot of students who have had years of, maybe issues in terms of learning. All of those students are included in those test scores. I would rather we didn't focus on test scores, but did look at proficiency in different ways that have been proven to give us a better picture of where students are at.
Senator Phillips-Hill, let's get back to what you were talking about before, which really amounts to accountability or transparency. It sounds like you're not satisfied with that. What kind of rules are in place right now? In other words, how much accountability is there right now for how we spend our education dollars?
Well, I think that parents are a great indicator of the success of a school. And we can tell you that we're seeing a record number of parents who are taking their children out of schools and seeking other alternatives for them. And that's certainly an indication of the success of a school. And tests are not perfect. They are a snapshot in time. But I think, again, to see schools that have students that are 0% proficiency and 0% in math overall in that school, that certainly is an indicator that things aren't working quite right. So I think those two things really give you a snapshot in time.
Let's move on to higher education, and Governor Shapiro has a plan for limiting tuition at the state system schools, and that plan would be the family could make no more than $70,000 a year, and then their tuition could be $1,000. And is this being explored in any kind of detail?
I certainly hope so. I have served on the PASHE, the State System of Higher Education, since 2015. So I'm very familiar with, what we have tried to do in order to keep tuition costs down for students. That is our state system. These are the institutions that we own. And the mandate is to provide an affordable education for Pennsylvanians. Just limiting or keeping tuition increases, which we've done for 6 years, by the way,
and the system is consolidated more now these days. It used to be 14. Is it down to 10 schools?
Right, or 12. We've gone, 10, yes. We've gone through redesign, which was a very complicated, and we're still in the middle of trying to, make the changes.
What does that consist of?
Redesign was, one, looking at which institutions need to be invested in, where some of our declines have been coming. We have a problem in the Commonwealth and throughout this country. We're not making enough 18-year-olds. And our traditional student was an 18-year-old student. So now we're looking at adult learners. For those of us that are in mid-career and thinking of changing careers, or upskilling is the term that we use. How can we also serve those individuals and those industries in Pennsylvania that are looking for that kind of education? But again, just keeping tuition flat isn't enough. We're not getting enough of the students who could possibly come to our state system, for example, if they had more funding just to be able to come to school. Many of those students are first generation college students. Their parents, their brothers and sisters may not have attended school. We have a great opportunity because there's certainly a large amount of those students that we could serve if we were able to limit the tuition. And by the way, states around us, for example, like New York, they have a different system, but their state system, there's zero tuition. So we are, we're losing students, particularly on the northern tier, to some of, to New York, for example. So the system redesign looked at how we could deliver more effectively, more efficiently, and meet the needs of a future workforce.
And enrollment is down by 1/3 at the state-owned schools. That can't help.
No, it doesn't help. But again, we face that issue of the traditional age of students. So we're looking at how we can not only increase the number of students that we can serve there affordably, but also those adult learners, or lifelong learners as we like to call them. And through the governor's blueprint for higher education, we would be better connecting community colleges where we know a lot of these students start because it is so affordable and it's close to home. Then we could make a seamless, streamlined system for students to transfer to the PASHE system.
Senator Phillips-Hill, what kind of progress would you like to make in this area?
Well, I'm interested to hear what my colleague has to say, because when we had the Chancellor of Higher Education before the Appropriations Committee, and we had the Secretary of Education before the Appropriations Committee, and we had the Governor's Budget Secretary, the resounding answer we received on any question with regard to this proposed merger was, I don't know. And so we really don't have a lot of details about how this is actually going to occur. So what is the challenge? The challenge is that after 6 years of massive amounts of taxpayer dollars going into the state system of higher education to keep tuition rates down for our students, we continue to see a hemorrhaging of the number of students who attend these schools. So why are students not choosing to go there? Agreed, we have a demographic issue. But I'll tell you what, we have schools like Thaddeus Stevens, schools like Pennsylvania College of Technology, schools even like your college back home in my district that have been nimble, that have created educational programs that are relevant to students to get the skills that they need to go out into the workforce and to be successful. They have waiting lists. And then we have a state system of higher education that has taken increased amounts of taxpayer dollars to hold down those tuition rates and still seen a decline in student population. So we've had these two mergers because it was going to right-size things and it was going to provide better educational opportunities for students. And we spent a lot of money on that. And we still don't have students. And we're told that next year they're going to need even more money to hold down tuition rates, and they expect further declines in student population. That doesn't sound like a plan for success in the future. And then one of the greatest details that came out about what exactly this plan is was its price tag. So we spent $1 million. This
would be the proposed merger between the state schools and the community colleges.
It's not a merger. It is not a merger.
That's the word I hear applied to it every time,
It's not a merger. It's not an integration. We don't know what it is.
We don't exactly know what it is. But I was at those hearings too, Senator, all of them. And I know that when Secretary Muneem, the Secretary of Education, was there, the Deputy Secretary, Dr. Shaw, was there as well. And she talked about, she answered some of the questions. The truth is, and everybody knows that, and nobody has claimed differently, is that all of the details aren't necessarily there. It is a work in progress. And that should give legislators pause in terms of, what we do in terms of funding.
And what are the questions that immediately leap to your mind, given this absence of detail?
Well, certainly, what will it look like? The community colleges are very concerned because they have been highly successful. I have one in my district.
Have they gone
I don't
on the
want
record
them
and
to
reacted
change.
to this merger? I know you don't like that word. I don't know what else to call it.
Well, I would call it a system. And it would not necessarily be under, our boards, our trustees, the community colleges would still exist just like they do at the PASHE systems right now. This is what I understand it to look like. I don't know all the details either. I would say this to you. Let's see what we can fix. We know we have a problem. I can't argue that we've had to invest a lot of money to support the system of higher education that we have. We have a lot of higher education. We haven't even talked about the state-relateds, and we haven't talked about the private institutions either. We know we face this demographic issue. How do we make higher education work better, work affordably, and bring us the workforce that we need? I am very much in support of our technical schools. A whole range of change has happened in society, and understanding that we need individuals that will have those technical types of degrees to do the work we need.
Senator Judy Schwank and Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill, we're going to give you a break for a minute while we look at program notes for here on PCN. Coverage of the PIAA 2024 Swimming and Diving Championships starts Wednesday, March 13th at 12:15 p.m. They'll run through Saturday, March the 16th, live from Bucknell University. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is a 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help PCN bring its viewers everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. And we have a call-in program we're doing right now, rather Capitol Preview. Part of that program includes taking phone calls from viewers, so call 1-877-PA6-5001, 1-877-PA6-5001, or there's a text option, and that would be 717-219-4001. Now we're talking about legislative priorities for the Senate. We've been talking a lot about education. We talked about basic ed. We talked about the state system schools. Let's talk about the subject of school vouchers, because that seemed to flare up a while ago and it was embraced. So it seems that the private school tuition vouchers have gone in and out of favor. Is that something you expect to be revived anytime soon?
I certainly expect that it will be part of the conversation. The governor has come out previously and said that he supports it. It is a priority for Senate Republicans. And when we engaged in this Basic Education Funding Commission tour, heard from almost 100 testifiers. I believe we were in 14 counties. We heard that parents want to be empowered to make decisions that are in the best interest of their children's education. And we recognize that in school districts that have really struggled, tomorrow it's not going to make it that much better a year from now, 2 years from now, and we have kids that are falling through the cracks. And we believe that it's a viable option to provide that opportunity for that child's future success, to empower that parent to make that decision for their child.
Now, Senator Schwank, as Senator Phillips-Hill just pointed out, the governor supported school vouchers until, however, there was some resistance from House Democrats. Now, you're in the Senate, of course, but what kind of insight can you give us?
Well, I think there was a great concern that if we are going to invest, I believe it was $100 million that was looked at in that last budget year, in voucher programs, what would happen in terms of public school funding? There's a great concern. Every legislator, Republican or Democrat, agrees that children deserve the best education they can get. And there are certainly places where there are failing schools. Partially going back again to our discussion on education funding, that disinvestment over so many years has created situations where we have schools that are not serving students as well as they could. But if we take money away from them, we're not certainly going to make the issue any better, and not every student is going to be able to access a voucher. And there certainly will be, possibly among the lowest income students, the ones who need it most, where parents may not have the resources to access vouchers, to, sometimes you would have to get your students to school, provide the transportation. It's a heavy lift when you're working 2 or 3 jobs in order to keep food on the table and rent paid. So we have some concerns about what that balance would be. Already, Pennsylvania invests millions of dollars in an earned income tax credit program where we are providing scholarships to students to attend private schools, and parents can make that choice. Again, primarily, it is the higher income parents that are taking advantage of that. But if we want to reform this, I'm willing and open to looking at that program so that we're not, again, throwing money at programs or at schools, and some of them may not even be, up to the standards that we'd like to see for our children. I also fear, just one more thing.
That's fine.
I also fear that once we start creating an opportunity like that, we are going to see an explosion of private schools coming online that are not necessarily, they're a profit center rather than being a focus of providing the education that our kids need. I'm not interested in spending money on that.
Address that, Senator Phillips-Hill.
I appreciate my colleagues' willingness to have the conversation because, these past scholarships are designed for just those people that you express greatest concern about. Families that live significantly below the poverty line, families that are in failing schools. These are not to replace EITC and OSTC programs and scholarships. As you noted, they're available to a wide array of students. But these are really specifically targeted students who are in schools that are failing, whose families don't have the resources to give them that opportunity anywhere else. And I think that really is the place where we need to begin this conversation.
Let's move off the subject of education, ladies, and go on to election integrity is really what it amounts to, because the governor created what he calls an election threats task force. And do you think that's needed? And as far as you can tell, what are the responsibilities of this task force going to be? What are they going to do? We got 2 elections this year.
Well, it's a great question. We really don't know. We don't have any specifics. This idea has been floated by the governor. And I'll tell you what, I hear a lot from the people that I represent back home in Southern York County. Every one of my constituents and every citizen around this Commonwealth deserves to have complete trust in the integrity of our elections. But when I hear about elections, what I hear about the most is the desire to have voter ID. It is wildly popular in my district, and according to the polling, very popular.
The public wants voter ID, Senator?
Absolutely. We hear there is significant support. Statewide polling, well over 70%. And that's something that's sitting in the House. It's a constitutional amendment. It could go onto the ballot, and the people of this Commonwealth could have their voices heard, because it would amend our Constitution. And of course, our Constitution doesn't belong just to legislators or the governor. It belongs to the people of this Commonwealth. And I think at bare minimum, we should give the people of this Commonwealth the opportunity to enshrine that in the Constitution, because voter ID is incredibly popular. And I believe my constituents would appreciate having that measure of integrity in place.
Do you think that's true, Senator Schwank? Is voter ID incredibly popular?
It is. It does poll. I do, though, have reservations about it, and I think a lot of my colleagues do, because we know that there are certainly some people where having access to the identification, particularly older Pennsylvanians and low-income people, minority populations, that may not necessarily have access to that identification. I'll give you a case in point in this because I lived it. My mother, who was in her 90s, of course didn't have a driver's license anymore. We went over to the driver's license center, because if you want an identification, they'll provide you with one, but you might have to wait in line. In fact, we waited in line so long that she gave up, that we literally could not stay there much longer.
Was it hours, this wait?
It was hours. And I didn't, I could have possibly, because I am a senator, called ahead and said, I'm bringing my mom in. But not everybody has access to that. And so I didn't do that and found that this system is not working as well as we think it does. If there were made available through senior centers, through continuing care communities, through community centers, all types of active interventions to ensure that people have this type of identification, maybe that's something we should consider. But in terms of the constitutional amendment, it's tied up right now, including a constitutional amendment to expand the statute of limitations on sexual crimes, particularly against individuals. It's a political, just morass that is getting in the way of helping us to solve really 2 separate issues. I think also on the issue of the voter integrity, Secretary Schmidt actually talked about this a bit. This would
be the task force
the
we're
task
back
force,
to?
right. This would be composed of individuals with expertise. You know, certainly there would be our county election workers and directors who are very, very engaged and see the problems head on. County commissioners, citizens, certainly individuals within state government that have some authority on this. We've seen some problems in counties, significant ones. And I absolutely believe this is a good idea. And we'll see, this is an important election year. It's a presidential election year. There will be a lot of people at the polls. How will we implement this to help reassure people? I agree with the senator that we absolutely have to reassure voters that our system is safe.
Well, let's consider a statement made by the leader, Senator Joe Pittman. He said, whether this perception is correct or not, there's a large segment of the voting public that does not have confidence in our electoral process. Do you agree with that?
Well, I certainly think that I hear a lot about it every day. And the devil will be in the details of what the governor has proposed. And
every day, Senator, is that right? That's pretty frequent.
I do.
Really?
I hear about these concerns very, very frequently. And, we're approaching a primary election. We've had challenges in York County with making sure that people have a ballot. We had polling places that didn't have the paper ballots. And there was a news piece that was on. And the gentleman said, I got to my polling place. I was there to vote for my wife, who was running for local office.
Right.
And they didn't have a ballot for me. So I went home, and then I went back, and the polling place was closed. And I thought to myself, if my husband came home and said to me, I'm sorry, honey, they didn't have a ballot for me when I was on the ballot and he didn't vote for me, it just wouldn't work.
I tried to vote for you, but I couldn't.
Right. It wouldn't work real well at our house. So, we have seen a lot of different types of issues. And I think it is incumbent on us to put in place those measures that are going to give people the confidence in the process.
And it's not just identification. And I agree with you. Let's take Act 77, which made some of the changes that we're seeing in our elections. For example, mail-in ballots. The legislature did this. I was a great proponent, and in fact had introduced legislation myself in terms of a mail-in ballot. So I hear voters that are very supportive of that, but they have questions. One, about having a permanent list. Many of the people that access mail-in ballots or even absentee ballots, they are elderly, or they simply have issues that they cannot get to the polling place because of work. You shouldn't have to need an excuse as to why you can't get to vote. We should be trying to make voting as convenient as we possibly can while maintaining that confidence. So first of all, fixing Act 77, but we haven't been able to get to that. That would be part of, creating that list I talked about, and also the issue of dating those ballots. Why do you need a date on it? If it's mailed and it gets to the Election Services office in time to be counted on Election Day, why is that extra date inside necessary? So we've had issues about correcting ballots, and different counties have responded to that differently. We need some uniformity, and the legislature has a responsibility there. So instead of arguing about it, let's get it done.
Let's talk about workforce development. And that strikes me as a very broad term. So let's try to narrow our focus and consider, what does that mean under Governor Shapiro?
I think he is looking at all the kinds of opportunities that we can create and continue to build upon the workforce we have. So that may include, let's talk about high school students. Dual enrollment, for example, to be able to go to high school and then also to get some college credits at the same time and save some money. It might be expanding our career and technical schools, which this budget does invest extra. There are waiting lists to get into our career and technical schools on the high school level. So we need to expand expand that network as well.
Put it this way, Senator, are there pending legislative items out there that just require more attention and address workforce development?
Well, obviously to implement some of these things in the budget, like increased apprenticeships and, single sites for opportunities for technical training, that will take some legislative initiative to do that.
So workforce is so important. It's important for those workers who need the skills to be successful in the workplace. It's important for those businesses who are looking for those skilled workers for their businesses to be successful. We have a lot of workforce development programs across just about every department in our state government. And recently, a colleague put forward a resolution that I believe passed unanimously out of the Senate that directs the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee to look at all of these different workforce development programs that we have. Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Are there redundant programs? Are there gaps in the types of training that we provide to workers? How can we make this better? How do we need to right size? We are going to have an assessment done by the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee. I am the chair of that committee. We recently approved that resolution. The study is now commenced by the staff, and we're looking forward in a couple months to getting that study, which I think will probably give us some ideas about where we need to go with workforce law here in the Commonwealth. The other thing that's really important as well, and I couldn't agree more, that career and technical centers provide excellent training. The York County School of Technology has a waiting list. Love to see those opportunities expand for students who want that type of educational experience. But we have seen really innovative programs popping up in other schools. Out in Hanover, a joint effort between local car dealerships, the local chamber, and the school districts to create an apprenticeship program so students can be trained to be auto repair technicians, a good family-sustaining wage job, and a great demand and need in South Central Pennsylvania. And it has been a really frustrating process getting this apprenticeship program approved by the state to get it in place so that it is accredited so that those students can go there. And recently was able to ask the Secretary of Labor, what are we going to do? The staff has been wonderful. It's been this board that has just been so difficult. I think we've finally worked the glitches out, but this would be a huge opportunity for students and hopefully something that we could replicate all across the state. So I think we also need to look at how we get these programs in place and not get them too bogged down. Of course, we want them to meet standards so that students are well trained and meet educational requirements. On the other hand, we don't want this bogged down in bureaucracy.
Only 2 minutes left in our program, ladies. Do you expect to take up raising minimum wage?
We need to do that. It's so critical. A lot of people think that minimum wage is just about teenagers working after-school jobs. As a matter of fact, over 40% of the individuals that are still earning minimum wage, which, by the way, includes the child care workers that we want to upskill and that are raising our children, many of those women are earning maybe $7.25, a little bit more.
Senator Phillips-Hill, last word on minimum wage.
I think it would be a mistake. Currently, the effective minimum wage in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is $10.30 an hour.
Can you live on that?
If we raise the minimum wage, thank you. If we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, according to the Independent Fiscal Office, we're going to lose 20,000 jobs in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and it's going to have serious inflationary impacts, particularly on rural Pennsylvania. It's not the time.
Our guests have been Senator Judy Schwank, Democrat from Berks County, and Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill, Republican from York County. Thank you both. PCN's Phil Beckman talked to Representative Tim Brennan about taking guns to polling places.
Welcome to the program. You were sponsoring a bill that would ban firearms at polling places. What led you to start thinking about this kind of legislation?
Well, actually, I'm very hands-on. I listen to my constituent inquiries. I often follow up personally. I found myself riding around the Delaware Canal looking for downed trees, and I had actually had a constituent reach out to me and asked me to look into this particular issue. So this is one of two I'm around a year, and this is one of two inquiries to my office that ended up leading to me introducing legislation. There's the Guns at the Polls bill, and also a rape kit registry bill that was a single constituent raised a concern, and we followed up on it.
How serious an issue is firearms at polling places?
Well, I mean, we've seen so many concerns over the last few years with rabid partisanship, misinformation. I think we're seeing a declining concern for civics. Just today in appropriations hearings, I talked to the judiciary, and they brought up threats that have been raised to the courts since COVID, and we're seeing over and over again that there's threats to election officials. In my personal experience, I had represented election boards, and I saw an entire wall of threats that came into these election officials, and frankly, a lot of them are worried. We've seen the 2020 election. There were threats made to Al Schmidt, the current Department of State Secretary, and it led to death threats. And we also saw January 6th. We saw these suits that election workers had raised against former President Trump, and it's getting harder and harder to get people to come in and want to work the polls. It's a job that really doesn't pay much. People do it because they care, and it's difficult when they're being threatened. And in some other states, and there's these organizations that are springing up that are asking for an army of citizens, and we have people in tactical gear showing up at the polls, and it's discouraging people to vote, and it's not going to get any easier in the coming years. We have more guns than people in this country. We have artificial intelligence that's going to create more information, and we're in the middle of a period with a lot of world conflict that could lead to other countries sowing further division, and frankly, those things are worth addressing.
What does the current law allow?
Currently, pretty much you can bring a gun into any polling place as long as it's not a prohibited location, like a school or a court. So those are some of the places where it's currently banned. And frankly, a lot of other states have already addressed this. When I looked into it, I found that most gun owners, 62%, actually support a ban for guns at a polling place. There's really no reason for guns at a polling place if you're not on duty. A majority of both parties support it, and the states that already have a law are places like Mississippi, Ohio, Texas. So we're sort of alone in many ways in not looking at it all. So,
what specific provisions would your bill include?
Basically, it's a prohibition of bringing a gun to the polls. There's three separate sections. One is bringing a gun to the polls. One is bringing a gun to the polls with an intent to commit a crime, and one is doing it with actually committing a crime. They're graded differently in terms of the penalties. I was very careful in drafting this to send it back and have it looked at a couple different times to add exemptions for police, for military. I'm a gun owner. I know a lot of gun owners. There's an exemption in there for lawfully stored weapons in your vehicle. So we made great pains to really strike a balance that protects that allows people a chance to vote, and also gives gun owners an option, and certainly keeps people from being intimidated at the polls.
What are you hearing from your colleagues about this legislation?
We've had several people co-sponsor it. I've had a lot of interest in this legislation. I've been contacted by a bunch of different newspapers, a bunch of different media sources about it. I think people are aware of these issues right now because of how much we've heard about these issues over the last 2 years. I think people are concerned leading up to a new presidential election, and I think reasonable people should all want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard and you get a chance to go out and vote, and that's what this is trying to do.
Where is your bill now in the legislative process?
Actually, it was we circulate a co-sponsorship memo. Several people have joined. The bill itself was actually introduced just today, so it'll be assigned to a committee, and I'm sure it will be more than likely. I guess it would go to judiciary or state, but I guess we'll have to see.
State Representative Tim Brennan, Democrat from Bucks County, thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you. It was great to be here.
Here's a reminder about coverage of the 2024 PIAA Swimming and Diving Championships, live from Bucknell University. They start up at 12:15 p.m. Wednesday, March the 13th, and run through Saturday, March 16th. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.